Hello and welcome to another Writer Showcase, everybody. I am very, very pleased to be here along with my wonderful guests. Today's going to be a fun time. We're reaching the climax of Battle of the Seven Suns, or at least the later part of the climax. I'm only doing this at this time because I have an errand to run at 3, and then I have to take a nap for work. But anyway, allow me to bring in my wonderful guest, starting off with...
Here's to the bard and I'm calling me plum. Here's to the beast and the rest of you scum. The cage is locked in and the town is aflame, and it's ours for the taking, though you get the fame.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen.
Always a pleasure, my friend.
Always a pleasure indeed. Dunk.
Alrighty. Well, I think this man actually has the most entrances, but I think I will give him this one for old time's sake.
Oh, I thought you were going to do the one where I burned down King's Landing.
Maybe.
That takes you back. Oh, greetings, you lot, in the chat, and not in the chat. What's a PFP?
Profile picture.
Profile pic.
Oh, okay.
Alrighty. Well, without much further ado, Tarek and Balerion, how about we do that? And then
actually, Balerion, you go first because I got some contractors here, and I'm not sure if the power's going to go out again. They should be gone soon.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Good. I'm going AFK-ish around 4 anyway. Have a second. I'm right with you. Okay, here I am. Let's see. And this is, we're going back to the serious ones, so no rabbits, I'm afraid. Unless the characters turn out to be rabbits at the end, but that would be a spoiler, so we're going to leave that out of it. So this is the serious one. The last we were at, the 2 counts got killed because they didn't want their kids in the harem. Okay. So, and the kids don't know yet about it. They don't know that the parents died. So, Chapter 10. Malware. Is somebody asleep or something? I'm hearing weird noises.
Oh, that was probably me. Sorry, I forgot to put my mic on mute.
That's all right.
Breathing.
Oh, yeah. I mean, okay. The messenger. Okay. Chapter 10. Malware Leash Bears. That's the name of a castle. Okay. Not this castle, though. This is a different castle. This castle is the Ambata. So, the messenger rode to the castle in a leisurely manner. If anything, rather slowing down when he came to the celebrated gateway, with the Count's motto, Jumbral Jumnai, loyal to the truth, inscribed in silver on a rectangular limestone arch. He knew his news wouldn't be welcome to most of the inhabitants and vassals, but so long as the lord and a decent number of vassals were content, this was not terribly important. Umaran, the son of the late count, was said to be, quote, loyal, end quote. He was certainly sycophantic enough, and that was what counted with this court. The messenger wasn't indeed certain how Umaran would react to the news, but all signs had pointed towards there being a coolness in his relations with his lamented gracious father. At any rate, he could be counted on to float with the prevailing current. Umaran, for his part, was ensconced with Burunu, governor of Ikhalumu, in what had been Count Garawada's study, and was now Umaran's. Pardon me. The Count wanted to change the decor to something with naked women. but had not had time, and as arrogant and brutish as he was, he knew full well that he couldn't do that so soon after his predecessor's death. I'll wait a week or so to fix up this room. It looks more like a study, for crying out loud, than a place anyone would want to spend any amount of time in. He waved a negligent and disdainful hand towards his left shoulder, almost knocking over his waka'a bowl, and waka'a is a drug. Fancy that, said Burunu. A study that looks like a study. Umaran laughed. Don't be such a pedant. You sound almost like my father. Gracious father. Whatever. This room is for fun, not for learning things, by Karat. That's why I've already begun getting rid of all the boring stuff like the 9 roots of knowledge. Who needs that? He snorted some waka'a and took a gulp of prune wine. Burunu sniffed. He hated vulgarity. At this moment, a drum beat outside the study. Great one. A courier has arrived from Exalted Box, said the guard. Let him in. Umaran was fairly confident that the messenger's news pertained to his father's long-expected execution, and so had the sense to receive him alone, with Burunu, but he didn't count. Seeing that the messenger wore the red and blue livery of an imperial courier with a picture of a flying goat on the chest, Burunu and Umaran rose and prostrated themselves. The former coolly but correctly, and the latter almost sloppily. Great ones. The messenger bowed and made a sign for them to rise, which they did. Exalted Box trusts in your loyalty, as you have shown us all these years. I have always been loyal. Umana sat down, whilst Burunu remained standing. Your loyalty may be tested. The messenger looked stern and grave. Your gracious father has been put to death for treason. I thank Great One for this news, said Umaran with a bit of a fake grin which he made a half-hearted non-effort to cover up. Would you care to join us? I am, as you can see, engaged in conversation with the governor of Ikhalamu, and we have important matters to discuss now that the estate is in my hands and my gracious father is no more. But we do have refreshments we would be pleased to share. We tried to sound as serious as possible. Luckily, he'd practiced his lines during his spare time from drugs, saranjis, and being rude to his inferiors and selected equals. And he did not, in fact, much want to share with the messenger, but could not afford to be impolite to an imperial courier. Luckily, the messenger was in a hurry to be back in Tenna. He hated the provinces. I have urgent matters to attend to and cannot stay. As Great One wishes, I will have my manservant see to your needs. One moment. There. Once the messenger was safely gone, Umaran took another pinch of waka'a. Well, that's what I call good timing. We can draw up... Oh God, this is a bad typo. We can draw up our plan of action in private. Sorry, pardon me a second, I need to correct something. I hate it when that happens, it's so annoying. But anyway. Just 1 second, I'm saving it. There. Okay, there's a bit of a pronoun mess up there. We can draw up our plan of action in private before anyone finds out, especially my gracious mother. She's liable to do or say something stupid if given half an opportunity. My gracious father was soft on peasants and vassals, so they kind of liked him. Even the peasants, despite being screaming ingrates, would probably shed a half a tear if they knew he was dead. So we'll have to give him a halfway decent funeral. He poured himself and Bruno another cup of prune wine each. Bruno... pardon me. I'm sorry. Someone's at the door. Half a moment.
Yes. Yes, that is all I'll say. I'll just fill time while Balerion is AFK. Yeah. Yeah, I was just like, good versus evil is deep. Okay, can you elaborate on that? I'm not sure that I fully understand what you're trying to argue here. Please elaborate. Because that's not deep. That's pretty base level, easy to understand.
Take my word for it. It's deep. That was probably the highlight of my streaming career, Replica Films.
He's a very interesting person.
Oh, without a doubt. I would love to go head-to-head with him again. Coincidentally, a few weeks later, what I said during that little, that little debate, my boss said, my boss was asking me, can you prove this? And I said, dude, take my word for it. I know I'm right.
Dang.
And you know what he said? Show me the research. And I said, whatever, fine. Again, if I had stood my ground like Replica, I'd be looking for a job right now.
Yeah.
Oh Lord.
Yeah. What can you do?
When I read my own chapter again a few months ago, because I wasn't sad. This was the time when I was at my grandmother's, so I wasn't satisfied with the quality that came out. I invited him on because I was actually curious as to what he would say about it. He never responded. And I am so disappointed.
Same. We're taking a very quick break.
Balerion had to answer to the door. He was the one reading.
Yeah, he was the one reading. So yeah, you're technically on time. Okay, he's fixing something. Replica was amusing. I don't know who the F you are, but you seem important. No worries. Like, that's interesting. Okay. That's good commentary, Victoria. Thank you.
My biggest... I know Balerion can hear us, and so I have no regrets about saying this. My biggest issue when Balerion reads, or when you read Balerion, is that you're so dry. You are so dry, and it makes it hard to pay attention. And I understand that's not something everybody can adapt to. That's not something everyone has the charisma for. But when you read, I need to hear that passion. I need to be like, oh wow, like what is going on here? Why he's reading it with such conviction. When you do anything with conviction, if you're charismatic enough about it, your work can be total shit and people will love it. I'm not saying your work is I'm not saying your stuff is bad. You know how I feel about the Communist Rabbits though. Or that Lord of the Rings one, whichever one it is that brings me nightmares at night. But dude, I'm just saying, you need to put some more oomph into your thing.
It's the rabbits. The rabbits are the ones who give you those are the ones that give you. Maybe the others. Maybe the other one did too. I don't know, but the rabbits definitely did.
I hate you. I
Don't
hate
mention
you
it. Don't
so
mention
much.
it. Don't mention it. Okay. I'm ready to.
Yeah, keep going. I think we're all
I'm
good.
ready to. I just need to open it up again because I was commenting in the private chat, so I had my thing closed.
Your thing? Do you mean your legs?
No, shut up and die painfully,
That
please.
That was weak. That was weak. Done.
Yeah, that was kind of weak. Sorry.
I know. I just couldn't resist.
Okay, you'll all mute yourselves. Thank you. Bruno frowned and took a grudging half sip of wine. He found this display of joviality to be in poor taste. Count Pylamore was beloved. It would be politic, therefore, to show some decent degree of regret. That's about the only downside to the whole thing. Umara slurped his wine noisily. I mean, it's nice to have power and being good with exalted box, but people here liked my father because he gave them lots of goodies. Waste of money, if you ask me. But there it is. So, I suppose he'll have to get a nice send-off. He shook his head helplessly. But the Emperor didn't like them, luckily, so he shan't have to glorify them too much. Have some makaa. Yes, I have the same problem, said Bruno, taking a pinch to be polite. He preferred to keep his wits about him, and therefore to avoid anything even remotely psychotropic. And anyway thought the subject merited more gravity. But in my case, I didn't even have the castle yet, or the girl. How durst he marry her off to some half-barbarian nobody, when she could have had me? I do have a splendid palace in Tharmalon, of course, but what's one palace when one can have two, and establish one's family in at least one of them? I wish they'd make governorships hereditary. They will. They're pretty close to hereditary now, but I hope they wait until they get rid of the family of the idiot Oeabe Mwembawa and appoint me governor of Heje instead. Pardon me. And the girl's off in Darzaza being wed to some rustic lordling, repeated Bruno, too wrapped up in his own wrongs to pay much attention to what his partner in crime was saying. I asked first. She ought to be mine. He banged a fist on the table, accidentally spilling most of his wakaa. Good. Now he had an excuse not to take any more of the beastly stuff. Umara laughed. Apart from her claim, I don't know what you see in her. He waved his left arm behind him contemptuously. The girls out there have no notion how to make themselves pretty. I've been collecting a nice set of Sandaranian Saranjis, along with a sprinkling of barbarian slave girls. And the plainest is more attractive than... what's her name? I love her simplicity, her wit, her estates, said Bruno fervently. His companion laughed again. But the obsequies, resumed Bruno, impatiently cleaning up the spilt wakaa and placing it in the rubbish bowl under the table. We'll have to ask that blessed ones be sent there at least. I don't want them sent at Serthaton, because that castle is still held by Pylamar's loyal castellan Azargan, who would doubtless use it to cement the people's loyalty to our predecessor's memory, and consequently their disloyalty to us. So we shall have to ask exalted bulks for the bodies. Umara made a helpless gesture. I hate politics, and I hate having to worry about what people will think. I prefer power, and using said power to have a good time. Well, I guess we've got to. But when the funeral's over, I'm going to hit the Bordelian pigeon and have the time of my life to make up for it. He took another enthusiastic pinch of Waka. Barunu frowned again, and I will do whatever is needed to obtain what is mine by right. Margaret and her castle. Enough of that, said Omoran, yawning. More prune wine? With pleasure, said Barunu, and did. And let me see. How much more is there in the next section? Let's see. Let's see. Yeah, maybe I should stop there. All right.
Okay.
Because of the interruption, I've taken up more than my share of time. Well, actually, no. I took about my share of time, counting the interruption.
Well, it's interesting. I can see definitely the plot is definitely ramping up. It seems like the tension is going forward. I get the feeling that this is going to be mainly like a like political drama. Like, is the ultimate plan to have like a siege, or like Margaret to like ultimately like assume the throne or something? That's the feeling I'm getting right now from it.
There'll be a siege in a few chapters, yeah. At the moment, yeah. At the moment, she doesn't know anything about all this, and she's off like far to the west, and she's getting married. Actually, spoiler.
Hey, oh damn it!
But
Am I coming in?
yeah,
okay.
Yes.
Sorry. Thank you. I just have one question. The barbarian prostitutes or harem, are these like Amazon women, or are you referring to barbarians as like anyone who's not in Rome, like not a Roman citizen kind of barbarian?
Yeah, basically anyone who they're considered uncivilized. They live they live in the north. They're considered uncivilized. They don't belong to their religion. They don't read or write. They're not under the emperor, at least not directly.
Because the reason why I brought it up is I'm imagining obviously like Amazonians and everything, and I'm saying you have a harem of those. The balls you have must be enough for all these women.
Yeah, sadly, they're probably underage, captive and captured in war and stuff. They were probably captured in war, and they were probably underage, some of them anyway. And all that. They're probably not very Amazonian, I'm afraid. Some of them might be, but the Amazonian ones would get away or fight them off or something.
Well, now I'm just disturbed.
Well, considering that is kind of sometimes the nature of at least Balerion's artwork, it's par for the course.
Well,
why is every one of these streams? Let's traumatize Tarek.
What's traumatizing you now?
The idea of like what you just
Child
described
brides.
with this harem, like
Child brides.
Yeah, that in particular.
Oh, that's disgusting, but it's nothing compared to what the Emperor gets up to. This is the one with the cross-dressing monkeys. That's the Emperor with the cross-dressing monkeys. And he has children, underage people.
This is some Nero Caligula shit.
Yeah, kind of. They're kind of decadent.
All right, well,
at least it's not my stuff.
True. It could be much worse. Let's all kneel down and give thanks. Oh, speaking of your stuff, pardon interruption, but what you call that thing? Dragon Blasters. Is that out yet?
Yes, it was released on the 26th.
Oh, okay. Needless to say, that's also a political allegory. We all know about that. Oh, and the math teacher, the mecha math teacher, that's obviously both Joe Biden and a lesbian.
I like to think of it that what Dunn is trying to tell us is that we should reject base 10 and go back to base 8 like the Romans. Our math system needs to be completely rewritten. That's what I'm understanding.
Oh, okay. That's pretty deep stuff, actually.
Clearly.
Archimedes can suck a dick.
No comment.
Well, he was Greek. He probably did at some point.
Nice.
Really no comment.
All right, my turn?
Yes, it is indeed your turn.
Okay, so as a reminder of where we left off last time, Aviana was continuing her training with Silas, and he put her through the ringer. Like, just the intensity of the training, trying to shove about a year's worth of fencing lessons. Not really, I say fencing, but sword lessons in a day when she's underfed, underweight, and very sickly. And when we left off last time, she just kind of passed out on the floor. And that leads us to where we are today. All right. Aviana opened her eyes. She was almost convinced that she was still asleep as darkness surrounded her. She lifted her head and noticed that the only light source in the room was slowly becoming dimmer and came from a brazier in front of her. She could see the cinders inside were slowly dying as the room gradually began growing colder. She attempted to shift her body, only to cry out in agony as even the slightest movement shot pain through her entire body. It was as though every muscle, bone, and even her skin were begging for the sweet release of death as she attempted to shift positions. Her cries echoed through the hall as she forced herself to roll onto her back and stare up at the ceiling, only to realize that there was a weight on her torso. She rubbed her fingers against the object, discovering it was thick but soft. She sifted slightly, ignoring her body's protest, and she felt the object shift with her. As she grunted as she sat up, and when she looked down, she saw a large fur blanket had been laid over her body. Where did this come? Before Aviana could finish the question, her hand touched the stone floor, causing her to yelp in surprise. It was as if she had placed her hand on bare ice. She quickly pulled her hand back to the warmth of the blanket, only to feel a chill race down her body. Even with the blanket, the room felt colder than her storehouse during most nights. What time is it? Aviana asked as she wrapped the blanket tighter around her body, shivering. She looked around the room hoping to find an answer, but only saw darkness. And though it hindered her, she was still able to make out a couple of objects in the room, noting the rack of weapons, as well as bare sconces, lanterns, and candles littered around the room. Aviana tried to recall how she ended up. Oh, sorry, I went too far. Stupid thing. Aviana tried to recall how she ended up on the floor, as well as what could have happened to make her so sore. As she brushed the cobwebs from her mind, a chill came over her, making her tremble, forget the thought as she turned towards the dying fire in the brazier, holding the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Please don't go out, Aviana begged between the chattering of her teeth. Tears formed in her eyes as she ignored her body's pleas to remain motionless and slowly got to her feet, the blanket firmly around her shoulders now. Her body felt heavy, causing her to walk in a hunch, and her movements were slow and stiff like those of a crone's. Every step was a struggle, and she could feel herself almost fall over several times as she continued. Even with the blanket to warm her, she continued to tremble and shiver, which only added to the immense pain she was already in. Please don't go out, she begged again as she took hold of the frame, which was oddly cool, and began blowing on the dying cinders. Every breath caused the cinders to glow orange brightly for a moment. Orange brightly for a moment, and warm her face before they went dim again. After several breaths, she began panting and became lightheaded. She would have fallen to the floor if she hadn't been using the metal frame to keep herself upright. As she leaned in to blow again, she felt her foot hit something that didn't feel like part of the brazier. Icy tears stung against her cheeks as she bent down, her back throbbing in anger along with her thighs. Doing her best to ignore the pain, she rubbed the object below her. The object felt rough and coarse, like tree bark, but somewhat sticky. Her arms wobbled as she slowly lifted the object, using every bit of her strength not to drop it. As she held the object over the dying cinders, it revealed that the object was a log, a wooden with a strange sour smell that she was just noticing. She sniffed the log again and scrunched her face. Lamp oil? She questioned. As she looked down at the brazier, she saw that the cinders were about to die. Just as the last cinder, as she looked down at the brazier, just as the last cinders were about to die, an idea came to her. Please don't go out just yet, she prayed. Aviana gently placed the log into the brazier, flinching as embers and ash arose, causing her to cough and choke. Once she caught her breath, she began blowing on the almost dead embers again. The room quickly hold on. She continued to blow. I apologize. Once she caught her breath again, blowing on the almost dead embers, the room quickly grew colder and darker with each passing moment. She continued to blow as hard as she could, causing her to get dizzy again, the room beginning to spin around her. After one final attempt, the log ignited so suddenly she fell onto her back as the room continued to spin. The smell of burning oil and a feeling of warmth enveloped her as she lied out on her back, panting and sighing in relief. Oh, thank Tyrion, she said as she curled into her blanket, ignoring her body's continued pleas to remain motionless. The brazier illuminated the tall ceiling above her, and she watched as smoke lifted into the ceiling before disappearing. Just as she closed her eyes to settle back into sleep, she heard a knock coming from one of the outside walls. Her heart skipped a beat as she listened and heard it again. Who's there? She cried out, hoping for an answer. She was answered by the sound of someone knocking against the walls, and her voice echoing back at her. Aviana attempted to get to her feet, but her limbs would no longer obey. Every attempt to stand resulted in her muscles moving a few inches before locking up and slumping back to the floor. A cold sweat dripped from her head as the knocking on the walls became louder. It has to be Silas, Aviana assured herself. He said that members always knocked to come in here, but what if someone had seen us yesterday? Maybe they're just imitating what he did, Aviana thought to herself. She recalled Silas constantly looking over his shoulder as they walked towards the training hall. What if somebody had followed them? The very idea caused her to whimper and shake in horror as she tried to get up. If she could only get to a dark corner of the room, she could probably keep hidden from the potential invaders. She managed to scramble up to her feet, despite the pain. But when she attempted to walk, her ankles gave way, causing her to fall to her knees, and then fall face first onto the floor. She laid on the floor. She turned to the now bright fire, cursing it for keeping the arena brightly lit. Suddenly, the knocking stopped, and the only sound was the brazier crackling and popping, and her heavy breathing. The sound of moving hinges echoed through the room, and a cold draft quickly filled the air as a raging, howling wind sounded from outside. Aviana whimpered and closed her eyes tightly, hoping for whoever found her would just ignore her. You're finally awake, Silas said as Silas's voice said as she heard him close the hatch behind him. Aviana nearly cried in relief and relaxed, her body spreading out on the floor, looking more like a puddle than a person. What are you doing spread out like that? Silas asked as she heard him walk closer. I can't move much, sir, Aviana responded, not even attempting to look at him. Not entirely unexpected. You don't have the stamina most initiates do when they start training with us, nor does it help that you're so frail. It's no wonder you slept the entire day away. I slept all day? Aviana cried out in surprise. You did. I checked on you earlier this morning and this afternoon, but you were deep asleep. Seems you had enough strength to keep the fire going, though, Silas said as his voice and footsteps grew closer to her. Though, it was foolish of you to light the brazier. They cause more smoke than a candle or a sconce. It would have been far wiser if you'd used a piece of bark to light the candles instead. Thought it was going to die from the cold, Aviana mumbled, rolling her eyes at Silas's criticism. You would have survived. That storehouse that you live in gets far colder than this place. Aviana said nothing, letting silence fill the room as she looked up at Silas and whimpered, feeling another bolt of pain ripple through her body. Come on, let's get you up, Silas said, sounding sympathetic as he took her arm. Aviana bit her cheek, but still cried out in pain as pain shook her body. She could feel that Silas was being gentle, but every motion felt like it could rip her arm off. Once she was sitting up straight, she looked up and saw Silas placing a heavy black fur coat, which was peppered with large ice snowflakes on the floor. Under the coat, he was wearing the similar pants and boots as the day before, but with a red-colored shirt on. It was then that Aviana remembered the blanket she had crawled away from. Thank you very much for this blanket, though, Silas, Aviana said softly, with a friendly but nervous smile. Oh, you're welcome. Though you may want to clean it when you get the chance. We've had that lying around here for a while, for when our initiates collapse from exhaustion. Kind of like you did. Aviana looked at the blanket and shrugged. A blanket's a blanket, Aviana giggled. Silas gave her a small smile before turning away and placing something on the brazier. I must say, though, you lasted far longer than I thought you would yesterday. However, you're never going to make it in our line of work unless you can push yourself further. Silas's remarks left her with a content feeling that made her smile, and her heart swell, but just as quickly, the feeling disappeared and was replaced with worry. Are we going to continue training today? Because I don't think I can right now, Aviana admitted as she awaited what was sure to be another criticism or lecture. Silas said nothing as he continued to rummage through the bag he had with him. He suddenly pulled out something that caused an odd gamey smell to drift into the room. In his left hand, there were two white looking pieces of meat that looked somewhat like fish, and in his left were two large bleeding cups of red meat. No. Today, you are going to learn how to cook, Silas responded. The sound of sizzling food echoed through the hall as the scent of cooked fish and pork permeated the air. Aviana took a deep sniff and shuddered from the heat and the delicious smell. She turned her head to the ceiling and noticed that the smoke rising from the brazier was disappearing into it. Where does the smoke go? Aviana asked, looking down just in time to watch Silas pull a piece of meat from the grill. There are vents built into the ceiling. The building was made so you can't see them from the outside, Silas answered as he placed the meats in front of Aviana. Why not just have a chimney like other buildings? The vents make the smoke much less noticeable since it's spread all around the building. It helps give the illusion that the building isn't unoccupied, Silas said as he took a knife from his belt. So, then why did you say I shouldn't have kept the brazier lit? Aviana asked. Because, even though the smoke isn't as visible, doesn't mean it isn't there. You need to be careful when using them. As I said yesterday, you never know who could be watching, Silas said as he began to cut the pork and fish into smaller bite-sized pieces. Aviana bit her lip and looked around the room, her heart starting to race as she stared into the darkest corner, convinced she saw something moving in the shadows. Good, you're learning to be cautious. But it's all right. I promise, we're the only ones here. Do you own an eating knife? Silas asked, showing her the one in his hand. It was a simple knife with a black handle and silver blade. No, sir, I don't. I have never had the need for one before, Aviana's responded, licking her lips as she looked down at the meat. Well, you're going to need one. You may be expected to be around a higher class individuals. It's necessary for most occasions, Silas said as he placed his cut of pork and cod onto his plate. Aviana moved her arm stiffly towards the pork on her plate. She was warm enough now that it hurt less to move. Yet, despite this, every few minutes pain would shoot through her entire body that she did her best to ignore. As she took hold of the pork, she immediately dropped it, yelping as the steaming piece of meat burnt her fingers. Let it cool first, Silas scolded. Aviana put her fingers to her mouth, sucking on them to alleviate the burning sensation. Why do you feel the need to eat so fast? Sorry. Aviana continued sucking on her fingers until the burning became just another occasional throb of pain. Because when I was in the orphanage, if you didn't eat quickly, it was unlikely you were going to eat at all. The orphanage didn't have enough food for everyone, Silas asked, sounding somewhat concerned. Not often. Every once in a while there was enough, mostly during the harvest season. We would all work the fields, and in return the farmers would provide our orphanage with food. During the other seasons, though, and especially the winter, there was barely enough for all of us. Some of the children were able to find employment, and some of some we're able to find employment of some kind during the off season, but usually they'd only bring back enough dharma for maybe a couple loaves of bread and a modest cut of meat that barely fed us all. In those cases, if you weren't the first one when the food was brought back, you weren't likely to eat at all, Aviana explained, the memory of those hungry nights feeling as fresh as they ever did. Silas nodded and looked down at her, the only sound now coming from the crackling fire behind them. So, what would you do when there wasn't enough for you to eat? Silas asked, breaking the silence. I stopped eating everything all at once. Things like bread, jerky, fruit. If I could save it for later, I would hide it under the loose floorboards in the girls' bedroom. When everyone was asleep, I would take a few bites just to hide it again. Silas nodded. He started to cut his cut of pork with his finger. He started to poke his cut of pork with his fingers, then his cod. I think the meat should be cool enough to eat, Silas said solemnly. Aviana lowered her hand and cautiously took a piece of pork between her fingers, sighing in relief as it didn't burn. She observed the meat, noting its white and yellow exterior with its soft white interior. So I looked for white meat on the inside to know if it's done? Correct. If your pork looks like that, it's fully cooked and ready to eat, Silas replied as he took a piece in his fingers and placed it in his mouth. Aviana brought the meat close to her mouth, the succulent smell caressing her nose and her stomach growling fiercely. She then placed the piece of meat into her mouth and began to chew slowly, looking at Silas. Her eyes widened, and a cry of delight escaped her mouth as the pork hit her tongue. The meat's even texture melted in her mouth with each bite, and the taste of pork, nutmeg, mace, cloves, and pepper danced around her tongue. Even the bit of fat was a delight as she swallowed the meat itself but continued to chew the fat, getting every little bit of flavor she could before spitting it back onto her plate. You make it sound like I made something worthy of King Tyrael, Silas said with a laugh. Instinctually, she lowered her arm to grab as many pieces as she could, but stopped just before she did. Without even looking at Silas, she slowly picked up another piece of pork and brought it to her mouth. Good, you're learning, Silas remarked as she watched him take a piece of cod and place it into his mouth. Once Aviana finished the pork, she reached for the cod on her plate and hesitantly brought it to her mouth. Unlike the pork, which had its own distinct flavor, the cod was mostly flavorless except for the pepper and ginger Silas had used to spice it. She grimaced slightly as she chewed on the bland flavor of the meat, along with the lean texture, making her shake as she ate. Don't like my cooking now? Silas asked. Aviana shook her head and swallowed the piece in her mouth, shuddering as the fish felt slimy going down her throat. Your cooking is excellent. I've just never had a taste for fish, she admitted, blushing. But not eating your cooking would be impolite, and I'm in no position to be picky, she said, taking a cup of water and washing the taste down. Silas chuckled and took a sip of his water. I might be able to make a raven out of you yet, after all. And that's it for this week.
There are a lot of waking up scenes in this book.
Yeah, because because this is kind of told over the course of a week. So you're seeing her days literally from beginning to end.
All right, I like it. That's a really interesting way of taking things.
I really like the dynamic. I've mentioned this before, probably, but between Silas and Aviana, it's very charming and cute. Even though he said he would kill her last time.
Oh, he means every bit of that. But like he told her, right now, you being dead would do me no good. Like, I'm not gonna just throw you into danger or into deadly situations without training you. That would do no one any good. But it's all about pragmatism.
But he's also nice to her too. So I mean, even though he would kill her if necessary, I think he still likes her.
That's because, and I believe this is kind of interesting from this kind of point of view. If you look at it like this, he's kind of one of the first people to really have extended interaction with her and treat her like a person.
Yeah. Yes.
Because, or not really, I say a person, but I mean like an actual child. And she is a child. She acts like a child, but that's the whole thing. Like, she is being treated like a burden by most people. Merrick sees her as basically something he needs to protect. And she only had like a few minutes of interaction with Tarek, Mikhail, and everybody else. But Silas is the first person she's having this extended interaction with.
Yeah, and I also like the bits. There were a couple of bits like more like a puddle than a person. And I like the bit where Silas just says, "You're welcome." I mean, there's one bit that I noticed that was a little off, where something about the similar pants and shirt to, or something like that.
Yeah, he basically he was wearing the same. He was wearing this. I think I said he was wearing the same pants and boots as the day before.
Okay, the same is good, because I thought I heard similar. Same sounds better. Yeah. Okay. Good. Oh, and also, by the way, no, I'm sorry to say that Herrick is not me, and it's tragic, but there it is.
But to your point, Dunn, I kind of never noticed that this does result her in her wake. Like throughout the book, she is waking up quite a bit, but I guess it does make sense with the way this is spaced out. Like as it goes on, the time frame starts moving a bit faster. It's just, we need to see at least a week, 3 days in her normal life, and then maybe 3 days outside of her normal life to get that sort of perspective on what a day in her life looks like before it all changes.
Mm. Yeah. Or I guess like some I like things that you want to kind of like convey with this, other than just so I can kind of like see what kind of feedback would be best.
You mean like what I want from the story as a whole, or for this chapter?
For this chapter.
This chapter was sort of supposed to be. Like I should say, this series of chapters was written with the intention of. It's not Avianas who's the newcomer here. It's Silas. And the idea with that is through Silas, we learn more about Aviana's past. Because he wouldn't know this. He'll know the basis of the situation. That's his job as a spy, or as a spy. He needs to learn about who he's working with, but he doesn't know her personally. So the whole point of these chapters is to, one, establish that she's learning to train. She's learning her trade, what her trade will be, all while at the same time we're getting a deeper look into who Aviana was before the book started. Like, what kind of events has she gone through? Why she has these certain social little things she does, like eating fast, or why she is so nervous, or why she is so not stubborn, but what's the word I'm thinking of? She stammers a little bit. Why she gets so nervous around people. What is going on with her? And like in the last chapter, we learned we've got her relationship with the matron who was working at the orphanage, because she learned to swim from her, and the other kids would make fun of her because of her social status as a civet. Since she doesn't have a last name and they do, it's sort of like, hey, you're a lesser person than the rest of us. And in this case, you learn why she eats so fast is because there was never enough food. And not only that, but why she has this habit of sort of saving food.
Yeah, I noticed that. I thought that was very very clever.
So it sounds like you've thought the whole thing through, and everything has a reason, justification for it.
That was the thing. Like when I was writing this initially, I was kind of going, well, why do people have the social cue? Why do people have the little personality traits they do? What makes those up? Something in their past must have required them, or they develop them over time.
Yeah, makes sense.
And then, of course, like there's the you've seen her be rude, you've seen her be snarky, and that's not because that's not a social cue thing. That's a child being a child. Like, yeah, she hadn't had the best upbringing, but a child's still gonna act out. Like, you can't repress that.
Yeah, and it's usually when someone's being obnoxious to her too, like the Archmage or whatever.
She wasn't obnoxious. She wasn't being a brat about that. She was horrified. Like, it's more like when she thinks Silas is taking her for a ride, like when they're going through the caves and Silas isn't giving her straight answers. So she goes, well, what the hell am I doing here? Why is nobody telling me anything? I deserve to know. She's not being an adult. She's being a child acting out.
I'm an adult.
Oh no, I just thought. Oh no, Aviana, young adult fiction. God help us, please no.
That's
Please
the thing.
no. YA Aviana, please no.
This was never supposed to be YA. This is, and I've said this before, but to me the most interesting stories are ones where you watch somebody growing up, where you watch them as they develop, not from like child to teenager to person. And I've decided to split this series, or rather the first book that I was going to do, into 3 different books, simply because I don't have enough. If I were to do this the way I want to, or in one book, it would be so long and people would drop it, I believe, because it's sort of like, hey, I don't want to read a 1,500 page book.
Yeah, I didn't mean her age. I meant, but not turn into Twilight or any of that stuff. That's what I meant by YA, not her age.
Oh, no. I never. I guess this could be described as YA, but I wanted to make a character who this is my way of going against the Mary Sue thing. That was why you watch her kind of suffer so much, because everything she has to earn, she has in later's books, you've watched her earn. You've seen her take life, what life has thrown at her, and turned it into her strength, as well as the opportunities she was given, the friends she has made. It becomes a very uplifting story, but even then, you kind of have to deal with the reality that her choices, and this isn't like in the 3rd book, the choices she has made will have consequences. It may be good for her, but that doesn't mean someone didn't get hurt during the process, or she didn't make enemies during the process.
Yeah.
All right.
What if Bella Swans asks Hypatia? Is that's the lady in Twilight, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
God help us. Yes.
Becca's been having me marathon the movies with her every other Sunday.
Oh, that must be lovely.
Shut up.
Don't mention it.
I was hoping it was a new type of swan.
Well, what can you do?
Exactly. Any other questions, comments, or concern, or should we move on to you, Dunn?
Sure. Let's move on to me. So, for summary, we have been going with actually reading the climax of Battle of the Seven Suns, the actual titular Battle of the Seven Suns itself. And currently, things are not going well. The heroes the main characters, i.e. the Empire of the Dragon Lords, is embattled with Sitharis rebels. And the issue is that they have been betrayed by the elves in their army. So now that creates a fairly large problem, because the elves were placed in the middle of their army, and now they're having to distract from their actual battle and having to deal with them both coming from behind their lines and being in the middle of their lines. And so the problem then also is their cavalry is almost completely destroyed out on the field, and the enemy hasn't even brought their giant elephants in. So that's the major problem that they're experiencing right now. So I think that should bring everybody who needs a summary up to date. For everybody, this is also the book with Hera and Narcissus in it. And the cool thing is, this is actually available on Amazon. So I'm giving you guys a preview. Well, a pitch, I should say, for the actual book, so that you can actually buy it. Let me actually pull up pull it up, since I'm actually very proud of the cover that I found right here. Okay, can find the place real quick. So let's see. Okay. And right now, Hera has just sent her general and her bodyguard to take care of the problem with the elves in the middle ranks. So this is chapter 11, The Courage of Orcs and Dragons. Ergast ran after his old friend, coming up beside him and bumping him on the shoulder as they went and toward the press of bodies. "Ready to get shown up, pup?" he remarked, happy to finally get into a fight with a worthy opponent after a while. "I was about to ask you the same thing, you old codger," Torash said, using his axe to clang the blade against his best friend's monstrous sword. Baring his fangs, Ergast allowed himself a feeling of joy as he spun the sword around. "I never expected to fight against the elves in my lifetime," he remarked conversationally as they made their way through the ranks of orcs toward the press of elves. I'm just wondering why the elves decided to turn on us and attack us from behind." Torash seemed more somber as they neared the point of conflict. Didn't make sense for Ergast. He was practically hopping from foot to foot with excitement. "All those big picture problems made you lose all the excitement of battle when such things happened." Ergast was just happy to have someone new to fight. Analdar and his fellow elven archers tried to bombard the enemy over their shield wall, but the orcs had formed a porcupine formation and began pushing toward them, using their spears to skewer the elves in the front, only to have their tips hacked off, blood-soaked ground littered with fallen spear tips. They were quickly running out of arrows, however, which meant that it would have to come down to pushing spears and blade work. Grimacing in apprehension, Analdar watched as the enemy began discarding their now ruined spears and drew cleavers and scimitars, as well as more brutal, if elegantly made, instruments of war like axes and maces. Analdar fired another pair of arrows, then brought his hand to his side to pull out another one, only to find that he had used his last one seconds before. Without hesitation, Analdar pulled his spear from where he had stuck it in the ground, then picked up his shield. The other elves who'd run out of arrows began linking their shields and strengthening the already formed shield wall, the one with fewer arrows passing what they had to the archers in the back to allow them to maintain barraging the orcs. Eventually, though, they had formed a porcupine formation several ranks deep, just as a rain of arrows came down among the elves. The formation they'd been forced to adapt prevented them from falling a complete wall of steel while putting their spears out, and the arrow shafts cut down several elves in the center before a few managed to duck down and cover themselves with their upraised arms. And Aldar saw several of his friends fall before the middle ranks had managed to put up a few shields up as a cursory protection. "Hold strong!" Analdar heard one of the officers shout. "We need to hold until the Satharis can arrive." We're all going to die before that happens," Analdar thought as a horde of orcs charged toward them, a wave of steel-clad monsters with weapons too heavy for a human or elf to wield. He glanced to the side, but he couldn't make out anything clearly with all the packed ranks of elves in his way. One thing was clear: mammoth calls were in the far distance, nowhere close to them. They were on their own. Just as another yell from the officer, this time from one of his sergeants, rang out over the army. A pair of orcs, both giant brutes, one with white and blue mottled skin, wielding one of those enormous T-shaped swords. The other one with a black and red mottled creature with a double-bladed axe shaped like an S. Bellowing in fury, the two orcs led a brutal charge toward the elves, and a massive orc smashed into them like a tidal wave of steel and flesh. Analdar lashed out with his spear, and to his credit, he managed to get it some lucky stabs in the neck or mouth, but the orcs were too strong, and rapidly the line began breaking. Arrows! Arrows! The call went up as the orcs rushed into the gaps in the line. The elves trying to form semicircular kill zones using their spears as penning instruments while pelting. The tactic soon crumpled as the points of the semicircles received the most concentrated attention from the enemy units, causing the entire formation to crumble in on itself. Eventually, the elven formation dissolved, and the orcs around Analdar drew their swords and tried to cut their way through. For Erissa! Analdar yelled as he drew his slightly curved sword and joined in with the rest of his fellow troops as they charged toward what was left of the shield wall that was holding the orcs back. As he rushed through, the elves and the shield wall broke, hurled aside by the two orcs who had originally led the charge. Now that they were closer, Analdar recognized General Torash and Lady Hera's bodyguard. Immediately, he felt fear explode inside him as the two orcs started cutting through the elves unfortunate enough to get in their way. They were like whirlwinds of steel and death. The dragon fire forged sword and axe shattering whatever lesser metal they came into contact with. Roaring, the pale orc cut one of Analdar's shieldmates in half, armor and all, then turned and swung his sword, splitting another man's head. Desperately, Analdar and his men tried to fight, but the massive orcs kept on compressing them until they were in a huddle with the monsters all around them. Eyes wide, Analdar stared around looking for an escape as he pushed his way back, elves falling behind him as he fled. His head flailed, vision darting around. Finally, he caught sight of a slightly thinner section of the enemy formation just in front of them. Maybe if we hit that, we can make a run for our allies' lines, he thought. Maybe a few of his comrades could live. Before he could yell out to his friends to make the attempt, Toresh and the other orc cut down the few elves in between him and certain death. The big pale one with the T-bar sword came straight at him, fangs bared in a terrible grin. Unable to think of another option, Analdar swung his sword at his attacker, trying to get him to back off, but the monster just smacked his blade aside with his bracer. Analdar tried to bring his sword up, but the brute smacked it aside again, this time with his sword. Then the sword came down as a thunderbolt. It was almost a gentle relief when the sword came down on his shoulder and sheared right through him. Toresh felt his concerns about what had happened with the elves fade away as he charged through their ranks, getting the formation to break just enough for the rest of his plan to come into effect. He slammed his axe down on an elf's unprotected head, splitting it in half before slicing the arm off another with his scimitar. Blood was everywhere, the dead and dying screaming in terror as he dealt death among them. Again and again, the elves came at him, but Toresh was in his element, fighting and directing troops. Once he was satisfied, Toresh took out his horn and blew 3 sharp notes. The signal passed on the elf line rapidly, and they quickly pulled back to the next phase of the assault to begin. Bagsugush! The wolf riders who'd been riding down the flanks came from behind, emmed into their ranks, and then swept through the center. To their credit, the elves didn't lie down and die. They managed to take several orcs down with them along with their mounts, but the sheer weight of numbers crushed them. In short order, the wolves tossed them aside, or their riders had cut them apart. Sword resting comfortably on his shoulder, Orgast walked to Tarish, grinning widely as he gazed around the carnage surrounding them. Ah, he breathed out, sounding satisfied with the day's work. The sweet feeling of a battle well fought. Not yet. Torashwa pointed his blood-soaked axe toward the cavalry battle on the plains. It was not going well for their men as they broke away from the enemy, the large war wolves allowing several of them to pull back, but more of their own were littering the field. Urgast grimaced, taking out a cloth and wiping off his sword. Well, more blood from my blade is always appreciated. Stomach slowly sinking, Hera surveyed both halves of the battlefield, watching as her men on the field were pushed back and the orcs in her rear ranks suffered a Pyrrhic victory. The elves had drastically increased their advantage, and now the elephants were marching or advancing toward them. They were building up speed for the charge, and once they reached her, they would trample all her men, even if the orcs used pikes to slow them down. Thankfully, Borahar had taken the precaution of beating a hasty retreat, his flight covered by the large wolves she'd sent earlier. Normally, her horsemen would have been pursued by the enemy cavalry, but the wolves running through the Sithar's horsemen were quickly forcing their ranks into chaos by causing their horses to panic and rear. At least all of the enemy cavalry was in battle in the field, so once they hit her infantry, they would be broken, but not without cost. And that was before the Mammoks got to them. Hera grimaced as more and more of her men fell, both from the infantry battle and what was left of the cavalry battle in front of her. As the remnants of the cavalry arrived and dismounted, likely because there were too few of them to do any damage, the enemy finally dealt with the last of the wolves. Rapidly, they began to reform and prepare to mount a charge. "Knock arrows!" Hera yelled, waving her sword toward the flag bearer, who moved the flags into proper position. "Loose it well!" Immediately, the orc and human archers pulled back their arrows and successive volleys. Hampered by a constant stream of arrow fire, the Sithar as cavalry were forced to back away. Sensing it would not be best to get struck by arrows, they quickly rode back to their own lines, most definitely so they could build up to another charge once the Mammoks had dealt with them. Looking like he'd been through hell itself, the usually foul-mouthed human general rode up to her, not in the same horse when he departed, likely from one of his own men. "Where were the wolf riders?" Borahar demanded, and as he drew up his mount, language uncharacteristically clean. "The enemy has us outnumbered, and we're losing men like 9 pins in a bowling line." "The enemy got up behind us somehow." Hera did not raise her voice, despite how frustrated she was with how this battle was facing up. Whoever they were facing was good, very good, and now they'd been significantly weakened, both by the cavalry battle on the plains and the fight with the elves. "I had to send wolf riders to clear out the rear. We've already lost a sizable percentage of our army. We should have sent everyone into the battle," Borahar grimaced. "Maybe then we wouldn't have lost all but a third of our cavalry." "No, it would have been worse," Hera said. "If the enemy had gotten more space to attack us, we would have lost more troops because of our forward momentum." Borahar grimaced, then glanced toward the enemy cavalry as it advanced, backed by nearly 100 elephants. The rest of them were kept by the infantry, which made up the bulk of the enemy army that was still waiting to engage them. "We need to prepare for the assault when they finally come at us," he said finally. "This is a disaster. We're already exhausted, while those turds over there," he pointed to the Sithar's army on the other side of the field, "are looking smug as dogs with full bellies." "Indeed," Hera nodded and agreed, nodding to him. "Have your men dismount and join the rest of the infantry. I especially want the archers to support the infantry." "We can't win. We need to retreat before more men are killed," Borahar grimaced. "We can't win, my lady." "I have never retreated from anybody," Hera snapped at him, unable to contain herself at that suggestion. "There has to be a way of getting out of this." "Look up there!" Borahar yelled, pointing up at the 3 dragons fighting up in the sky. "He can't win up there, not 2-on-1. The enemy outnumbers us at least 2-to-1, possibly 3-to-1. We're in an impossible situation." "Indeed, you are." The same voice that told Hera to put the elves in the center spoke from beside her. Instantly, she jerked and looked around, trying to find who had spoken, but there was nothing there. "Where are you?" she muttered. Borahar gave her a confused look, but she waved him away and let her eyes roam her immediate area. "You don't need to say anything." A short teenage girl in a glowing red dress appeared beside her, long silver and black hair flowing behind her. "I can hear your thoughts, Hera. Just think it, and I will hear." "Who are you?" Hera stared at the small girl, trying to make her mind comprehend what she was seeing. "Are you Echidna?" The girl shook her head in a smile. "No, I'm not, but that's an easy mistake to make." She stared into Hera's face with an interesting expression. You look like my mother did, except for the silver hair and the eyes. You have my brother's eyes. What are you talking about? Nothing she was saying made sense to Hera. That whole last sentence made absolutely no sense to her. This ethereal being had a family, and Hera looked like her mother? It made complete nonsense. You won't understand what is going on right now. The girl looked up at the dragons. I'm only able to interfere to this degree because of the dragons above us. Their battle represents a crux point, and it will only grow more intense. She glanced around on the battlefield at this oncoming force of Sithar's cavalry. However, someone needs to lead the fight on the ground. This battle cannot be lost. If it is, then the whole course of history will be completely changed. What must I do? Hera asked. Well, it's very simple. The girl pointed toward the elephants. What is your enemy's greatest strength? They're dragons, Hera said automatically. But they only have two. The other woman tilted her head. I think you need to adjust some things in your head. As soon as the word two came out of Hera, the girl's mouth, the switch went off on Hera's head. The Mammox, she said automatically. Grinning, the girl clapped her hands together as if an incredible performance of some great deed. So, how do you turn their advantage against your opponent using what you have in your hands? She asked. We're outnumbered. Even without the Mammox, and even if we pit the infantry against those monsters with pikes, the enemy won't even blink as they crush us, she said, tightening her grip on Darkfire's hilt. That's the thing about Mammox, the girl said calmly. They're like a glass cannon, devastating in application, but brittle if they're hit. Oh, what? Hera shook her head. You make no sense. I know, but that's all I can say. The girl touched Darkfire's hilt and ran her hand along the blade. The solution is in your hands. It's all in front of you, Hera. You're good at seeing what's in front of you for what is, not what you want it to be. Use that skill now. Abruptly, she vanished, leaving behind a haze of red light. Hera shook her head, trying to think through what she'd been told. It was so cryptic, but maybe she could glean something from what she could understood. And devastating in application, brittle if struck, she whispered, looking down at the sword. The solution is in my hands. It all came together in one single flash of inspiration. Of course, it was so obvious now. What is going on? Borihard ended, clearly confused and angry. Take that tone again, and I'll tear your tongue out with my own hands. Urgas snarled back, drawing his T-bar sword and pointing at the general. After I cut you in half. The effect was immediate. Borihard blanched and seemed about to turn his horse away, but Hera raised her hand, halt him from leaving. Wait here, but everyone shut up, she said firmly, nudging her horse forward. There is a way to win. They have the advantage, but that advantage can be turned against them. How? Borihar asked, though he kept his calm tone and one eye on Urgast. I'm going to scare the bastards so bad they trample their own men, Hera declared, hefting Darkfire in one hand. Then she splurred Obliterator to run down the hill and gallop right at the enemy. Urgas was about to leap off the hill and follow his charge into the battle, but Torash put his hand on his shoulder. No, wait. Let her handle this. Something about that look in her eye when she'd spoken had given him pause. Both of them together wouldn't have been able to stop her even if he'd tried. Why? Urgas demanded of his friend, pointing at the massive elephants moving toward Hera. She's going to die out there. For sodding once, I agree with the bloody brute, Borihar remarked, his customary foul mouth asserting itself. If we don't get in position, she'll be trampled by those beasts. Under his breath, he muttered, even if we do, the mad woman will probably die. Torash shook his head. Something more is happening here. He sniffed the air, frowning as the incongruous scent of sulfur got in his nose. Where was that smell coming from? Putting it aside, he watched Hera ride toward the Mammoks, all of them of which bellowed and drew their heads up, the spikes on their tusks glistening as they moved forward. Come on, Hera, prove me right. Hera watched as Hera rode out, Darkfire in hand. What is going on? She grabbed onto the saddle and slid Isiphan out of the way of a lash from Meraxia's tail. Thinking quickly, she urged Sisyphan to attack, fire roaring from his jaws as Meraxia flapped around Ares and Tantala. We need to kill them quick, Orisa thought as Meraxia dropped, then shot toward their cavalry, a jet of fire flashing from her jaws and consuming at least 3 dozen men and horses. The worst bit of the damage was the fire frightening the horses and making them scatter. Tantala pursued, then backed away as Meraxia shot a blast of fire at her. Somewhat satisfied that her brother had some control of the situation, Hera turned toward Hera. She made a mad dash toward the Mammoks, advancing along the battlefield. The import of her vision suddenly hit her, a woman wreathed in fire, surrounded by orcs with red, burning eyes. No! She screamed as she impulsively urged Sisyphan toward the lone, silver-haired rider. I have to prevent the vision! Roaring, her dragon unleashed a jet of fire at the princess. Dark fire flew out of her hand as Hera leaped from the saddle as this purple and silver dragon shot down toward her and obliterated her, fire roaring from its jaws. The fire consumed her horse, leaving only a pile of ash without even a single whinny. Tears of pain and sadness flowing down her face, Hera fumbled around for her sword, dirt clogging her eyes. Abruptly, she felt a hand press a sword hilt into her hands, along with a warm touch. There you are. Someone wiped the dirt out of her eyes and helped her to her feet. Now, how about you not get killed? That would put a significant damper on things. When she stood up, she instantly recognized the girl who had told her to charge. Like what? Hera spat a clog of dirt as the dragon wheeled toward her. No time. The girl placed her hand on Hera's cheeks and kissed her forehead. Hera Fireborn, I give you my blessing for your courage and wisdom. Let now be the time where you show forth my wonders. Abruptly she vanished, and Hera felt the knowledge of what she needed to press into her mind, just as a set of red lines appeared on her skin. Without a word, she turned toward the dragon as it flew toward her, fire blasting from its jaws in a torrent. Dark fire blazed in her hand, as with red and black flames, just as the dragon fire hit her. And that we'll call it good for today. And we'll continue next week.
Was I the only one imagining the battle from Return of the King as he was describing that? Except replace the orcs with the elves?
Kind of, yeah.
Because you had the elephants, you had the, like the charging and everything. You had the dragons. It was just nuts, man.
Yeah. Kind of a major influence for this was actually the battle of Gaugamela, where Alexander and the Battle of Cannae, but with slight differences in fantasy India, where the elves actually being a traitor force rather than the straightforward antagonist.
Elves are always traitors, as we all know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's see. Speaking of elves, do these elves have any particular elvish traits, or could they just be any other force, but they happen to be elves?
They have pointed ears, and they are specifically elves because they are meant to be the primary antagonists for the next 3-4 books.
But I mean, not very many like distinguishing like cultural or psychological characteristics that you'd know. If your character were an elf, would you know it was an elf just as soon as they said something?
In this book, no. In others, they have their religion is focused around a being called the Green Mother, and I'll reveal who exactly that is. In the book 6.
Oh, okay, yeah, because maybe maybe a little characterization would help with them.
Yeah. Well, part of it's just like that's not the there are other elves that are like the elf Arissa is the primary antagonist of this book, and she sees visions of elves being burned alive by dragons in the far future. Which are like she sees their forests being completely destroyed by the dragon lords, and she's trying to prevent it.
Okay, and that lady, this interesting character, the one who suddenly appears to Hera,
Yeah.
but she has an interesting expression. Interesting in what way? Was it interesting or interested?
I think it was interested, probably. I can't. I need to look back at it. Maybe I need to change it. Yeah.
Interested is good. If it's interesting, then maybe that's something a teeny tiny bit more specific.
Probably, yeah. Yeah. So it's actually meant to be the remark about the glass cannon is meant to be anachronistic because this person is not from this time period.
So it's like the express train in The Hobbit.
More like time traveling Bran.
Oh, okay.
Because this person is, like she says, please don't mess this up. You will screw up the course of history if you don't.
Causality is a fickle thing.
Yeah.
Ah, that's interesting. So are we going to get more of that? That's the lady who appeared to Hera, right?
Yep, that's the person who appeared to Hera.
Ah, will we get more about her? Because she was the most intriguing thing about the whole bit.
Yes. She has been it. So kind of one of the things about this book is that weird and strange things have been happening throughout time throughout this series. Like sudden storms will come up during dragon fights. People, one lady lost most of her memories along with her dragon and had to have somebody else fix her memory. Another person, and just kind of weird things, strange visions have been occurring across us this thing, and we're kind of seeing her for the first time, though we will kind of get all of the answers in the book after next.
Oh, okay.
Because and the specific references to her mom and her brother, both of those are characters that appear in book 6.
Ah, cool.
So I have a really big plan for how things are going to go. And partially because specifically this person can is able to see measures of the future. Sure. And is aware of certain technologies that the world is not aware of yet.
Ah, okay, that's interesting.
Yeah. So the glass cannon was a very deliberate thing that is meant to make no sense, because I have a big plan of like, oh, so that's why she knows this. but kind of one of the things is like this is on a several 100-year timeline. Like the next book is going to be a few like 4 or 5 decades after this battle, and then the book after that is like 200-300 years after.
Okay.
Alrighty.
I'm hearing some weird noises in the background.
That might be Tarek.
That wasn't me. I was hearing them too.
Oh, maybe that's probably like somebody moving upstairs since I have a hollow ceiling.
Oh.
Oh, okay. So that's what that was. Oh, and I should, before we leave, I want to thank Victoria Amat for her feedback on my chapter because I saw it in the chat. So thank you.
Yeah, I'm liking Victoria as part of our chat. I think that's great.
She's a fine addition. I agree.
Yeah, she's been great.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, any other thoughts and feedback before we close?
The elves deserved it.
Granted. Any like thoughts on like the action? Was it like easy to follow? Did it make sense?
It was easy enough to follow. I wasn't hearing a lot of like flourish to it. Like, you know what I mean? Like it sounded like very standard battle. I wasn't hearing a lot of like positions being taken up. I mean, in terms of sword play, but that wasn't the big focus anyways. I just think like, I just like to be a more, that's why I write things the way I do. I like it to be more visual.
Mm.
Yeah, when it comes to...
Go for it, sorry.
Thank you. Just that when it comes to battle scenes, I tend to enjoy them more in visual media where you just turn off your brain and you just... Especially if there's lots of light stuff going on. Otherwise, in terms of books, I'm not usually focused on those so much.
Mm-hmm. It is harder to... I had to like very... Like, I definitely like didn't want it to be super graphic, like say Joe Abercrombie's The Heroes. But there's a lot of elements of the book itself is meant to be a like just a single build up to this one battle, so that you can kind of just as kind of a thought experiment that I had.
Yeah, not too graphic is good.
Mm-hmm. Alrighty. So I think hopefully like the next like section of the battle will be very interesting. So the interpersonal stuff with that is I've spent most of the book trying to kind of build up the characters. Like it's about half of the book is the battle at the end, but I make sure to like build up, because if you don't have a context for who's fighting, it doesn't make any sense. And also like the end of the battle is built around Narcissus's arc and how that finishes up. So, and we didn't see him here, but don't worry, he'll be back in the next chapter, and he's mostly reformed, and he makes a kind of the culmination of his arc is at this point in time. So I'm excited to share that with you guys next week.
Yeah, wouldn't it be a ride if he joined the Sothorians?
That would make so many people angry.
Well, I don't know, not that many people.
It would also just that would also be like Danny. That would be the equivalent of Danny going mad, and honestly, because that's his girlfriend down there. Admittedly, she's also his cousin, but yeah, what can you do? Like,
well, it could be worse.
Yeah, it could be. Well, that seems like we're all good. Nice, good showcase, everybody.
Well, yeah. Oh dear, I'm such a jerk sometimes.
I know.
I'm such a jerk, not you.
Well, I've done worse. Yeah, I've done worse things, and I'm planning to do worse things in this series. So, what can you do? I'm a terrible person, if you hadn't noticed.
I think we did.
Yeah, based on the number of times you yell, "Shut up and die."
Die horribly and painfully.
Well, that's not going to be for a very long time,
Although.
unfortunately. Alrighty. Well, we will conclude it there. Thank you, everybody, for coming, and we'll see you guys later. Bye.
See ya.
Well,